Welcome everybody, this is SharePoint Patterns and Practices Webcast, and this time we wanted to actually, let's say, concentrate on the deployment options for SharePoint Framework solution. And in this particular case, it means explicitly what does it mean that we have, for example, the new tenant-scoped deployment option available in the SharePoint Framework solutions, which was released after GA but before 1.3 version of SharePoint Framework, and what are the other implications on when you're deploying a solution or a web part or an extension, to be precise, to the SharePoint Online. So how do you actually deploy them? How do you activate an extension, as an example, in a site? And what are the options for you to manage those things? My name is Vesa Juvonen. I'm a Senior Program Manager from SharePoint Engineering. And with me today as the person asking difficult questions is Waldek Mastercards. Waldek, will you do the quick intros as well?
Of course. Hi, everybody. My name is Waldek Mastercards. I am Office Development MVP. I work at Rancor, and today we'll be talking about deployment options for SharePoint Framework solutions.
Indeed. So the title is relatively generic, but like mentioned, we really wanted to concentrate on what does it mean when you're doing a tenant scope or non-tenant scope deployment option in SharePoint Framework, and how do you get your customization activated on the site or not. And we only have one slide because we wanted to actually demonstrate these deployment options in practice, but let's talk about this one slightly. So what does it actually mean? So if you're using the 1.2 version or newer version of SharePoint Framework, I think it is 1.2, it doesn't matter, the latest version of SharePoint Framework, it is actually asking that are you looking into deploying this solution as a tenant scope option or not? And if you do choose the tenant scope option, what it means is that if you put a web part solution to the application gallery, your web parts will be automatically available in the web part picker. But then it might have caused, and we know that it caused some questions from the community that what does it actually mean for extensions? So I have a SharePoint Framework solution which contains, for example, application customizer. Why isn't it activated across all of my sites and all of my site collections?
So would that be, before we go to extensions, let me just ask one thing, right? Because Absolutely. We had similar option available with add-ins, right? When you would deploy the package and then you would actually install the package in the app catalog site, and that way you would be able to use the add-in across all sites. Is this the same?
Not precisely. So if we quickly go through back on the add-in model timeframe, that was a tenant deployed add-in. And what it meant was that you actually created the add-in instance to the app catalog site collection. And then you said that, hey, I want to have this add-in visible across all of my sites, even though the terminology in the UI was I want to have this add-in deployed across all of my sites, which wasn't actually the case. What happened there was that we added a link to that add-in, which still remained in the application catalog site collection, to the site contents page of every single site where you selected that to be deployed. For example, based on a site template or based on a URL pattern or so on. That's slightly different scenario because in this case, what we're doing, if we talk about, let's concentrate first on the web part. So the web parts and SharePoint Framework solutions, they actually, the way they get deployed is that when you activate an application, that solution in App Catalog, we actually kind of enable the flag and to be that web part to be available to be used across the whole tenant. And what I mean with that one is that we store the manifest of the web part in the application catalog site collection. It's hidden there, you don't need to know that it's there, but that's what actually happens in the background. And then if you do not have the tenant scoped deployment option enabled, you will still need to go and explicitly install the solution in a site and to get that web part visible in the application picker. But if you do have the tenant scoped option enabled, then the web part will be just automatically available within all of the sites and all of the pages within your tenant, as long as the web part solution has been deployed in the app catalog. Hopefully that made sense. Did it?
Not really.
Thank you, Waldek. Thank you for being honest. So please ask questions. So let's try to clarify.
Yeah. So let me try to recap that, and let's see if that is easier. So with add-ins, there was a link from every single site pointing to the instance of add-in, right? Because back in the days when we installed an add-in, that would create an add-in site, right? Sure. So you had to go to that place.
Correct.
Now with SPFX, that's not the case, right? Because the only thing that we have is the manifest, and as you said, that's stored within the catalog. So, and that's not copied around to any site. That's just a reference that it is there, and it's now turned on.
Yes.
And the moment we choose to deploy it tenant-wide, that's just a checkbox, right? That it says now it's available everywhere. Every site that's querying for available web parts will also get that link to that manifest, and with that, it will be able to show the web part, and you will be able to add it on your pages.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
Gotcha.
And now that's the web part story. So, but then the extension story, it's the new fellow, the extension G8 September 2017, which is a great thing. But the extensions do not get automatically available or in the UIs in your site collections, even though you would actually deploy them using the tenant-scoped deployment option. What the tenant-scoped deployment option means for extensions is that you basically enable them to be available. It doesn't mean that they're visible yet. And then there's the additional step where you actually activate the extension, for example, application customizer in a site collection level.
But I guess that in a way it is comparable. It is comparable to web parts, right? Because even though you deploy web part tenant wide, it doesn't mean that web part will show on every single page across the whole intranet.
Correct.
It is available there for you to add.
True.
And its extensions, it's exactly the same. It is available there for you to add. Well, the caveat there is that whereas users can add web parts through the UI, you cannot do that with extensions, right? So extensions are meant to be set up in a different way, correct?
That is absolutely correct. So technically, though, what you're saying, concept is exactly the same. And who knows, at some point, we might actually have an extension picker for administrators of the site collection, so they can actually see what extensions are available and they can enable them in the site collection scoped or site collection.
Great idea. You know what? Let me go quickly to user voice and to submit that as an idea.
Absolutely, please do that because we want to get votes on those user voice entries so we can prioritize the demand. We understand the demand of the field for these ideas. Now, okay, that hopefully kind of settles it, and maybe we'll absolutely create some additional documentation on this one, graphical clarifications and what does it actually mean. And it might sound complicated, but I think the easiest way to understand what's happening on the background and what do we need to do is actually do this live. So we wanted to, in this webcast, we really wanted to basically do 4 different solutions. Simple out-of-the-box web part, or what do we need to do to get it deployed, and also tenant-scoped web part. What does it actually mean? Simple application, normal application customizer, and then tenant-scoped application customizer, and how do I actually get it live on the site? So let's actually do this. So let's start with web parts. So let me actually get on my machine. So here's my web part setup, or the solution setup for this particular webcast, and we're going to talk about the remote provisioning patterns and how does that impact during the demo as well. But let's start with the normal web part. So let me go to the X normal and quickly have a look on what do we actually have here. So here's my Visual Studio Code. This is just an out-of-the-box web part which has been already deployed. It hasn't been technically. Extension. Yeah.
Ooh. You want to grab another one? The web part.
Wow. Yeah, indeed. I'm talking about the web parts. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. It's good to have somebody else to watch what my hands are doing.
Pay attention, right?
Yes, exactly. Good to know that somebody's paying attention. Here we go. So let's get to the web part. Now we're in the web part. And what we've done here is that we've done already kind of initial deployment of this web part. So you can actually see them working in practice. So we have already the JavaScript files being hosted in this location. So we don't have to deploy stuff. But this is just a normal web part, which is the out-of-the-box clean web part, just doing the basic setup. And there's a text which is saying I'm normally deployed. So let's have a look on what does this mean in practice. So if I start an Explorer and let me actually jump to my app catalog, which is completely empty. How do we get stuff deployed? We go to the SharePoint solution folder because I've already done the package solution option. And I drag stuff in here. And because the JavaScript files are already in my CDN, I don't need to actually get them explicitly deployed. I can show you that in a second as well. Now, we can see here that the URLs where the JavaScript files are being loaded is the public CDN and SPPNP CDN address and the VP normal. And that's fine for me because I've actually set this one up within my tenant. So I'm clicking deploy. And essentially what it means is that we already previously created a CDN setup for this tenant. And in this case, those JavaScript files are being hosted from this folder. And because it's an Office 365 CDN, they're being accessed through the CDN, which is much more performant. Now the solution is that web part is available in my app catalog. So let's actually create a new SharePoint site. So we can actually quickly create a new site using the modern UIs. So the site creation is super fast. So let's call this Webcast Demo 1. And getting that one created, it takes typically 5, 6, 7 seconds, which is still, I can't, it's super amazing how fast these are nowadays, comparing old time when we were creating classic theme sites. So here's my site. So now, because the solution was a normal web part, if I go and modify this page, we do not see that web part available in my web part picker or component picker or whatever we call this. So the only way I can actually get the web part to be available within the site is that I actually explicitly go to the site contents, add new and app, and then I select that web part, which is now visible in the apps you can add functionality. And there's my web VP normal client solution. And after doing that, then the web part is available to be used within the site. Now, obviously, that was when we started the GA of SharePoint Framework, that was step number 1. And this isn't optimal because what if you need to push one web part to be available in hundreds of thousands of site collections? How would you do that? Because we don't have a native APIs, at least at the time when this video is getting recorded, to get this solution deployed to the site. So that's not really an optimal thing.
And I guess that another scenario that is not included is, what if you want the web part to be available in newly created sites?
Yes, immediately on the newly created sites, immediately when the site is getting created, you want to have that one available. So that's not an optional thing. So let's actually move back on here, and let's get back on the let's go VP and tenant-scoped CD VP. And tenant-scoped, there we go. So I'm going to open that solution. So this one has been configured. Where's my packet solution? There it is. This one has been configured with the tenant-scoped option to be enabled. And that's essentially the question in the Yeoman template. So let me actually do that as well. So if I go in here, let's create a sample folder. And let's clear that one. And now if I do Yo Microsoft SharePoint, when we run through the Yeoman template, we actually ask, do you want this solution to be automatically deployed across your tenant? And that question is only if you choose the SharePoint Online only option. So that functionality is not available in SharePoint 2016 Feature Pack 2. I'm going to use that folder, and this is the question. Do you want to allow tenant admin the choice of being able to deploy the solution to all sites immediately without running any feature deployment or adding apps in sites? Pretty big picture, but it is pretty descriptive though. So this is the tenant-scoped yes or no question.
And I guess there are so many things in it, right? Because what it actually says is that, do you give the admin the choice? Meaning, it's not going to be always deployed tenant-wide. Admin correct. Will still have the choice whether they want to do it or not, correct?
Yes, that is correct. So let's have a look on that. So let's actually have a look on that. So I'm going to pause that one. I'm going to jump back on my solution. So this is where the tenant-scoped deployment option was set to true. And we wanted to actually check how this actually works. So I'm going to open up the Explorer. In my SharePoint solution folder, we already previously created the solution a few minutes before the recording. And now if I go to App Catalog and I want this solution to get deployed, we can drag and drop again the solution. Now the question is slightly different. So the question here is actually saying there's the URL pointing to the CDN, all of that, but make this solution available for all sites in the organization. So even though the developer has designed and made the decision that, okay, this is a web part which we want to push to all of the solutions automatically when it's getting deployed, it's still a tenant admin or the app catalog administrator decision, is that the case or not? So if you do not check that checkbox, then the solution is not automatically, or the web part is not automatically getting deployed. Now,
so there are two things I want to ask, and I'm not sure if now is the right time for it. So first of all, you said that developer makes the choice whether they want to allow it or not. Why developers?
Well, I didn't say that. The developer makes the decision based on the design of the functionality.
Well,
is
yes,
the web part
yes.
meant to be used across the site collections or not? Now, and then the admin actually makes the final call. The key change and key point here is that if the skip feature deployment goes through, as in it is a tenant-scoped deployed option, we do not execute any feature XMLs which might be as part of the solution. In this case, in our solution, we do not have an XML files here, but you might have, for example, a dependency of the web part to an existing list or a new list on the site. So as part of the installation of the solution, your web part is assuming that there's a new list called, let's say, My Urgent Tasks. And sure, yeah, theoretically you can execute JavaScript which is creating that list, but what if the user who's actually adding the functionality or adding the web part to the page doesn't have permissions to create lists? That's where the feature XML-based provisioning actually wins. And because the feature XML, if you include those in your solution, based on our tutorial guidance as well, we execute all of the XMLs and feature definitions by with elevated permissions. So even though the user wouldn't have the right permissions to create lists, when you add the solution to the site explicitly, it will actually execute the list creation process.
So there are, again, two things that I want to say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Because this flag is, let's say, related to how the package is built, that's exactly why only developer can say whether it makes sense for their package or not.
Correct.
Right? So
Correct.
As you said, the admin makes the final call, but it's only developer who built the package can tell whether that package is suitable for tenant-wide deployment, or if it has declarative provisioning elements inside, and which is why it has to be installed for each site, because otherwise the package would be, or parts of the package would be skipped, correct?
Correct. That is absolutely correct. So
if you think about it, imagine that you didn't want to do any of the XML because reasons. What would be the alternative approach to achieve exactly the same, right? So to be able to allow users or unprivileged users to create all assets that the package needs.
So let's talk about that one. So just making sure that the web part works properly. Now that we created this one, Webcast demo 1, and let's put that web part here. If we go to the web part picker, we can see that our tenant-scoped deployment web part is available, and that's getting deployed or rendered properly. So even though I don't have any solutions installed on the site. Now, if this web part would have a dependency on a list, like mentioned, you can use the feature XML inside of the solution, but then you would have to explicitly install the solution always to the site. And that's not necessarily an optimal thing, even though sooner or later we will have an APIs to do that. Now, the alternative option, what you can do, is that if you have a solution which is owning the site collection provisioning, essentially you have a site collection, self-service site collection creation story, and you have a custom endpoint there, which is, for example, applying some theming and colors and all of that to the site. You could use that to, let's say, create those lists available. And that would be the typical way of making that happen.
Right. So in other words, you would either need to have an add-in or an AAD app that runs on their app-only permissions, right? So in order to elevate.
Correct.
And then that component would provision everything your package needs in the site.
Correct. That is correct. Yes.
Gotcha. Which is significantly more work than adding a few XML bits.
That is absolutely true. So I already hinted that we will have sooner or later ALM APIs, and that will tackle some of the story as well. Because this is not this is definitely one of those things where we don't have what is the best practice. Well, It absolutely depends. It depends what your web part is doing. And it depends on do you have a self-service site provisioning, and it depends on how do you create your sites and who's creating those sites and all of that. So we will have an ALM APIs quite soon available, which will kind of fulfill the final gap on the scenario. And then those are designed to make it possible for you running code and install applications, add-ins and SharePoint framework solutions one by one to the site. So you are still able to have or automate the installation, because right now there's no APIs to make that happen. So if you have a solution which requires to be installed explicitly on a site, there's no supported APIs which would actually make that happen right now. Now, okay, so that's the web part story. We kind of already talked about slightly the extensions, but what about the extensions? So let's actually have a look on extensions and kind of a similar setup with the extensions as well. So if we go first, the normal extension story. If we run through our tutorials and you have a look on the, for example, the where did it go? Application customizer. We actually use the non-tenant-scoped deployment option in the tutorials, which basically means that there's no skip feature equals true in the solution package solution definition. And we actually create you, as part of the 1.3 version forward, we create you the default feature definitions and all of that to your package solution JSON. And that basically means that to be able to get this extension available for you in the site, this particular extension, which is not tenant scoped, you will need to install the solution to the site. And we can actually, let's walk this through. So as part of the solution, default solution structure, we actually create an elements XML file. The elements XML file is automatically generated based on the default values. And in this case, it's basically saying, hey SharePoint, whenever the solution is getting installed to the site, please associate this application customizer with this ID as a user custom action to this site. And by the way, this is the parameterization for this application customizer, so that whenever it's being used, this is the instance level configuration for the extension. Now, let's actually make this one deployed so we can walk through what happens and what's then the difference between that and a tenant-scoped extension deployment. So in the SharePoint, we do not have that fellow yet, so let me actually start Explorer in this folder so we actually can get it easily deployed. So let's get in here in the SharePoint folder, solution, and that's my extension normal. And there we go, we can see that it's a normal activation of the solution. Let's get that one deployed. And now it's available to be installed on the site. Now, right now at this point, I'm going to quickly create a new site because this is the default extension. I haven't done any modifications on it, and it's pretty annoying actually when you get it up and running. You'll see it in a second. But let's create a Webcast demo 2 site. It's definitely HBI policy. This is super secret. Site is getting created, and the finish is getting lighted up right about now. Excellent. So now if we go on this side, so obviously the tenant-scoped web part is available on this side as well immediately, which is a good thing. But the other web part isn't, and the extension yet isn't. So how do we get this extension? Because it was a normally deployed extension available and activated on the site. Well, we go add an app, and then in here we can see our extension application or solution. Let's select that one, and that is now getting installed on the site. So there we go, it's getting installed on the site, and we can do an F5. This really depends on the speed of things, so that was fast. And we can see that I refreshed the page, solution is now installed, and my application customizer is getting executed. So there's my application customizer, which is, by the way, a super annoying customizer, because if I click OK, and if I now go to the home page, it's actually doing that again. So not necessarily something what you want to do. But the key point here.
So the feature XML that you created, what does it do?
So what happened here was that because we installed the solution to the site and we activated this feature, which is automatically packaged inside of the SBPKT file, and this feature activated or executed this XML fragment. And this XML fragment essentially is saying for SharePoint that, hey, there is a user custom action, which is an object, a collection in the web object, and let's associate this client-side component ID, which is matching the manifest ID of our extension. So if I come in here, it is matching actually on this one. Let's associate that one to the user custom action collection of the web in this case, and let's give this as the default parameterization and the execution. So you can see that if I get back in here, it is actually saying test message because our parameterization is saying that that is what it should be showing.
Right, and because that's an application customizer, you don't need to specify any additional info such as field ID.
Correct.
Or
yes.
anything else.
That is correct. Yeah. So if it would be a list view comment set customizer, or if it would be a field customizer, then this XML looks slightly different. But we do actually create that default setup for you as well nowadays in the bundling, or the scaffolding, which is pretty cool. Now, okay, so this is. Again, we needed to activate the solution in a site, and that's not really an optimal thing because if you have, let's say, a self-service site collection creation story and you want to have your extensions activated by default on those sites, and we don't have an API, how would we know this doesn't feel right? So how do we actually want to make this happen? So let's close this one because it's the annoying site which is prompting that alert all the time. And let's go to our second fellow, which is the extensions in the tenant-scoped mode. So tenant-scoped, let's do the CD there as well. Friday, it's been a long week. We're recording this on Friday afternoon. So.
While you're opening this, another thing, can you still bring up the XML? Because there's one thing that I wanted to ask.
Absolutely. On the normal extension, right?
Yes, correct. So when we add a web part to the page, you can open the property pane and then you can specify parameters, correct?
Yes, correct, yes.
But because for extensions, there is no UI to do it, we have the option, and extensions allow us to use parameters, right? So yep. you can build it once and then adapt it to every single site you want to use it across, correct?
True, that is correct.
But somewhere you have to be able to actually specify the values for your parameters, correct?
True, correct, yes.
So that's what we can do here as well. So not only enable it, but also configure it for this particular instance.
Yes, and that's pretty much the client-side component properties here.
Gotcha.
And that's a super, super important thing to realize as well, because that you can drive the behavior of your extension based on these properties. Now, in this case, in that particular site, this extension has already been up and running. And yes, you can use APIs, remote APIs, REST APIs, CSM APIs to go and modify these properties if you need. And then that can change the behavior of the extension. In this case, it's just managing what it's going to be actually shown as a message. Super simple extension. But it could be the behavioral things. It could be almost whatever. It's up to you what your customization is doing. That's the thing.
So, in other words, whatever or the same approach that applies to web parts, whether you build a web part that do one specific thing, or you make it more flexible and allow the user that adds it to the page to set it up, you can do exactly the same here.
Absolutely.
You can build extensions once and allow it to do different things depending on how it's being set up on that particular instance, whether that's a site or a list or a field.
Correct. Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, let's get back on the tenant-scoped deployment option on the extension, because I know that this is super interesting for some of the people who are trying to figure out how to make this happen as well. Because, like mentioned, right now, if you need it, if the requirement would be that you need to always install the solution to site to get your stuff enabled, that's not really optimal. So how do we make this happen in a larger scale? So this is a tenant-scoped deployed extension. So I can show you that in the package solution, again, we have that attribute called skip feature deployment equals true. So even though the solution would have XML files, we would actually ignore them. This means that whenever the solution is getting installed on this application catalog, it is immediately available across all of the sites. But because it's an extension.
Assuming that admin chose that.
Exactly.
Right? Because
yes, exactly.
Because it's still a choice.
Absolutely. And in this case, because we chose that this is a tenant-scoped deployment, we did not by default create you the default XMLs because there's no need for them. So our scaffolding engine is kind of clever enough to understand that. You can still create them and modify this to be false if you need to afterwards as well. Absolutely doable. Now, in this case, let me actually open up again the Explorer here, and let's get this fellow deployed to our app catalog. And where's my folder? There's my folder. Let me actually refresh, just in case that there's no pending UI things. Yes, up, yes, hello, yes. Let me click there. Complete refresh. There we go. So this is my tenant-scoped extension. In the SharePoint folder solution, by default, we have X tenant-scoped. So let's actually get that one deployed. And now the question again is slightly different than for the previous extension, what we saw. Where we were asking that from the admin that, okay, do you want to have these extensions available across all of your sites? And this is the final control from the tenant, from the let's say app catalog administrator. Technically, tenant administrator can delegate responsibility of the app catalog to anybody else, but ultimately it's the tenant administrator who makes that decision. Now, let's click deploy. Now, this does not mean that application customizer is now activated across all of your site collections, because technically that would be insane. You might have hundreds of thousands of site collections, and most likely you want to have slightly more targeted way of providing that functionality or activating the functionality. Or it might be that in some site collections you have multiple extensions, some site collections you have subset of extensions. So that's why we don't want this to get activated automatically across the whole tenant. But then the question is, how do I actually make that happen? Now, in this case, like mentioned, let's actually create a new clean site. We can, well, technically we could use this one, but let's create a new site so we can walk through the whole process. So let's create a site. Let's call this demo Webcast demo tree. And definitely this is top secret because we don't want anybody to access that. And creating a site, luckily it takes only a few seconds. And there we go, clicking finish. And there we go, there's our new site. So now how do I actually get on this site that tenant-scoped extension available? Like mentioned, it is already available to be used within the site, but we haven't associated that to the right objects. And the easiest way to actually do that is, well, you could run REST APIs, you can run CSAM APIs, or you can take advantage, for example, the PnP provisioning engine to make that happen. So let me actually get in here, and in my PowerShell, so let me clear this one. Let's actually go and connect PnP online, and let's connect to that site using PnP PowerShell. I'm going to first show and activate the extension, and let's have a look on how did we actually make that happen in a second. So we're using the PnP PowerShell, super valuable, increases productivity enormously for these kind of scenarios, because we're able to manipulate the sites directly in the context of the site, and that's pretty enormous because we can automate all of the stuff. Obviously, you can automate the logins and credentials and everything else as well. You can now, for example, do something like add PnP list and or list item or list well, add a library. No, add PnP. What else? Client-side page. There's multiple different things what you can do. Humongous amount of things that we can actually modify on the site. Now, in this case, we don't want to actually do that. So let me slightly move to a new location. I do have an extensions XML on my site. It's a serialized PnP provisioning template, which we can actually have a look as well. So let's have a look on that one. So we're going to start again, have a look on that one in the Visual Studio Code. This XML is using the PnP provisioning schema and the definition. And what we're doing here is that we're saying that whenever we are applying the template, the super simple template, because we removed everything else from the template, it might have lists and everything else, we activate or create a new user custom action, which will have this particular ID, so unique ID, component ID is that one, which is matching again the manifest ID of the component, which is now already deployed to the app catalog. And then we're able to provide the parameterization. So in this case, we're going to use updated message as the parameterization for that particular functionality.
And I guess that with that, you can already see that it resembles a lot the feature XML that you had previously, right?
True.
It's almost identical.
True, absolutely. And this has been documented. There's schema, there's examples, there's a schema files, everything else. So, and people are quite nicely and using this a lot anyway to automate their stuff. So now if I do apply PnP provisioning template, and we want to reference that file extension XML in here. We are already in the context of the site, the Webcast demo tree site. I'm going to execute that one. This one, technically what it does is that it uses CSAM underneath, or the remote API, CSAM or REST underneath, and it's going to actually apply that configuration to the site. That was super fast, again, because we only had one entry in the template, so it didn't take that long. But now if I go back on my website, Webcast tree site, and if I refresh this, we can actually see that our tenant level, tenant-scoped deployed extension is available within the site. So now if I scroll down, there's my message, and it's using the updated message in the UI as well. But key point difference here is that if I now click OK, we can still go to the site contents, and we can see that there's no solutions installed on the site because we took advantage of the tenant-scoped deployment option, which just remotely configured the extension to be available within this particular site. And the same could happen for your, let's say, field customizers or the list view command sets. In the same way, you can just light up the extension. As long as you have the tenant-scoped option enabled and deployed in the app catalog, you can light up the functionality just remotely accessing and setting the right properties in the site level.
Right, and I guess that the benefit for that is also that when you already use provisioning engine like the one here, but I can imagine that would work with also other engines that just use either CSAM or REST, that you could make enabling the extensions a part of your deployment. When you create a new site, you create libraries, you can make that complete by including extensions as well.
Absolutely, absolutely, and like you said, Waldek. So you probably there's a lot of customers who invested on this automation, on the provisioning and governance automation as well. The PnP provisioning engine is just one sample. It uses native out-of-the-box APIs to make all of that happening. So it's just a convenient way of automating stuff on the sites as well. But good, quite long demo, but I think we went through the different options, the impact of the different options, and when do you need to deploy, and how do you parameterize those individual instances as well. And that was really the key point here as well, to understand how would I parameterize differently, for example, my application customizer in certain site collections than certain site collections. Well, you would just run against, for example, you would use a different template. So it's not just about the feature XML-based deployment option.
Right, and also that's the one thing that we didn't really talk about is that when you look at the template that we just had at the end with PnP, you can imagine that you can run that template against different sites and provide different values for each site.
Correct.
Now imagine that what if you wanted to achieve the same through XML declarative provisioning? Would you have to have feature for each case?
Yes.
Each site, or how would it work?
That's a really good question, and I don't know how it would actually work, because for me that feels not as a suitable thing. So if you need to have a multiple different, let's say, configurations based on your site, I would say that the remote provisioning, remote API way of configuring them, absolutely the right way to do. Because that gives you flexibility and then making that happen. Plus, if somebody goes and deactivates the solution which you have deployed, what would it then mean? Your user custom action is then removed from a site, and then your behavior is different. Now that you use the tenant-scoped deployment option, you can control the behavior across the tenant much more efficiently.
Right, and also the fact that when you add solution to a site, you actually install the package in a site. At that point, you cannot choose which feature gets enabled.
True.
So if you have 5 of them, one setting it to orange, one to blue, one to gray, and so forth, you're going to really choose which one is enabled. So by default, they are all enabled, correct?
Correct. That is correct, yes.
So then you would have to turn all of them off and then turn the only one you need on. That wouldn't really make any sense, right?
Yeah, that doesn't sound right. Absolutely. That is true.
Yeah, and also if you need another way to set up your extensions, you would have to update the package, redeploy it just because you want to add another choice, right? So that doesn't really make sense either.
That's true. Absolutely. Cool. I think good discussion, absolutely, and hopefully you'll find the video useful. The whole point, like mentioned, was to try to clarify what does the tenant scope mean for different component types and walking through the different options. We'll get some of this stuff absolutely documented in the docs.microsoft.com/SharePoint sooner or later, but hopefully this is good reference for you as well. But thank you, Waldek, for joining. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we'll come up with a new webcast sooner or later. Thank you.
Bye.